Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, carrying on from part one, and I've just realised I was snivelling a lot. Yeah, I've got a flu or something. I apologise about that. So, we talked about in part one about what evolution was. We talked about Darwin. We talked about the two ways how Darwin came up with evolution, the mechanisms. One was natural selection, the other was acquiring of characteristics. Now, we talked about how evolution was how we as human beings, if we focus on human beings, I know it's all of the species, but as human beings, have evolved from different life forms and different species from before. And the two processes from that was natural selection and acquiring of characteristics over generations. Now, we proved how acquired characteristics cannot be passed down. So even though Darwin probably got that, or most likely did get that from Lamarck, um, we saw that that wasn't true. And obviously, we said that even though it's not true, we know that geneticists today don't even accept it anyway. So we just covered that in the first bit. So the second part today is about natural selection. Okay, so natural selection. Now, before I go into this picture, lovely picture I got from the internet, let's just define natural selection. So natural selection is a process where organisms better adapted to their environment survive and produce more offspring. With, this is crucial, yeah? Produce more offspring with the beneficial characteristic. Characteristic. Okay, so what that means is, what natural selection is let's imagine, let's go to the giraffe because that's what we're going to do today. So imagine a giraffe has a long neck. Okay, it's a beneficial characteristic, isn't it? A long neck means it can eat the leaves which are higher up in the tree. So because it has that, it will outcompete. Yeah. So firstly, it's better adapted to live in a place with high trees. Giraffes are better adapted to live in places with high trees because they have long necks. Because they're better adapted, they're going to be more likely to survive. Short-necked giraffes would die. Long-necked giraffes will keep on living. And because they will keep on living, they're going to be able to reproduce, yeah, and mate with the other gender, and therefore there'll be more offspring with long necks. Yeah, there'll be more giraffes with long necks because the long-necked giraffes are the ones who are able to reproduce, and so therefore the theory says that because they reproduce these long-necked giraffes, they will have more long necks now. Giraffes will have more long necks. However, we saw in the previous episode that acquiring characteristics, Lamarck's theory of acquired characteristics, is not how this works. So when we go through this, yeah, this natural selection, yeah, we know this does not occur. Does not occur through Lamarck's theory. Through Lamarck's theory, yeah. There is another theory which is proposed of how this happens, but it's not Lamarck's, and we'll come to that in I think next episode we'll probably come to it. But we're dealing with natural selection here, yeah? Okay, so natural selection, just to give you an overview before we go into what it is, this is explaining, okay, how we get species with certain characteristics. So, for example, it's explaining how giraffes all have long necks. You don't find any more in the world, yeah, giraffes with short necks, yeah, with short necks that can't reach leaves at the top, yeah. Okay, you might have the odd one or two, but if it is, that will be abnormal, yeah. The normal thing is for all giraffes to be born with long necks. Natural selection is telling us how do we get all of these species having that good characteristic, okay. So, let's use the example here. It's a beautiful picture which I got of giraffes. Okay, so look at number one, yeah? Let's do black because we don't do black because we usually do black background. So, number one, each species shows variation. So what it's saying is in the beginning, yeah, before any evolution has taken place, you have short neck giraffes And you probably might have had some long neck ones as well. Yeah? Then what happens is there's competition within each species for food, living space, water, and mates. This means like sexual mating. So what this is saying is, okay, you have long and you have short neck giraffes. What's going to happen is there's obviously only a certain amount of leaves which can be eaten. Yeah. So let's imagine here. Let's say you have 2 giraffes, but there's only 1 leaf. Okay, on this tree, on this big plant in the ground. Yeah. So there's only 1 leaf though. Okay. It's saying these 2 giraffes are going to have to compete with each other for that food. Yeah, and they're going to have to compete with each other to live in certain places, to get the same water. Yeah, to be with certain other giraffes. They're going to compete. Okay, and so number 3 says the better adapted of those species are more likely to survive. Survival of the fittest. This is so important. Okay, natural selection is all about survival of the fittest. What that means is that the better adapted members, the giraffes, the members here are giraffes, the giraffes which have the better adaptations, which have the longer necks, are more likely to survive. So more likely to survive are long-necked giraffes. And as you can see here, you have a long-necked giraffe, and when that has offspring, or children, that one's long-necked, that one's long-necked, that one's long-necked. It's going to pass that on, okay? But most importantly for number 3 is to understand what survival of the fittest means. Survival of the fittest means that those which are the fittest, those which have the best characteristics or best adaptation to survive, they will survive. And they will be able to reproduce and pass those genes on, whatever the better adaptation is, whether it be the long neck of a giraffe, whether it be the claws of a lion, whether it be the really good running legs of a horse. Because they're the fittest, they will survive and they will pass that down, and they will survive. Number 4 then takes that one step further. It says the survivors will pass on their genes to their offspring, who will also have this beneficial variation. So what it will say is because the long-necked giraffes survive, which is called survival of the fittest, these people with long necks, these giraffes with long necks, will be able to reproduce, and therefore the whole population over time will eventually evolve, if you want to say. So from this, the population would evolve into long-necked giraffes, into a long-neck giraffe population. Okay? Because survival of the fittest. Those who have the best adaptation, i.e. the longest necks in this one, will survive, reproduce, and pass those characteristics onto the offspring. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Now remember we talked about in last episode that the way how this is passed down. So we talked about here. So number 4 here. Yeah. The survivors will pass on their better genes. Darwin thought this was through acquired characteristics this happened, yeah? He thought that through the giraffe having to acquire the characteristic of stretching to get longer necks, it then passed that down onto the offspring. We know that not to be true, yeah? Through genetics, we know that not the way how the acquired characteristics cannot be passed down in genetics. So next episode we'll talk about what is the modern theory of how natural selection occurs, and how this number 4 occurs, yeah? We'll talk about what that is. And then after that, hopefully, we'll then get into the refutation of the different parts of Darwinian evolution, okay, and see some of the questions which have been posed which it hasn't been able to answer yet. Okay, I hope that helps. Yeah, any questions, remember to put them in the comments. Yeah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.